Good morning. In the opening verses of the book of Job, when we are first introduced to him as a character, we are told that he was blameless and upright, a fearer of God, meaning he honored God. Job gets one of the best report cards of the entire Bible. But after that report card, the story kind of goes downhill, because Job gets wave after wave after wave of bad news. And he learns that he has lost all of his family, and that he has lost all of his earthly possessions. And then, as if that weren't enough, he is then stricken with boils, open, searing, oozing wounds from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. And he sits down in the ashes of what was his former life. And then a kind of beautiful thing happens. 3 friends show up. And they sit with him in the ashes. And for 7 days, they say not a word, but are just there with him. And if that's all that they did, Job would be a short book. And while it would still be tough and no one's favorite, it wouldn't be as terrible as it turns out to be, because these 3 friends eventually open their mouths. And they've had some thoughts going on over those 7 days of silence, and they speak them. And what they want to get across to Job is that all of these horrible things that have befallen Job are almost certainly his fault. And at some points in their conversation, they want to say, well, you probably did something terrible, some secret sin that we don't know about, but God knows about, and so God is punishing you. And then in some points of the conversation, they say, well, you just didn't do enough good things with all of your wealth. You didn't serve the poor and feed the hungry and care for the widows and the orphans, and that is why God is punishing you with these terrible things. Now, in Job's vulnerable state, and with the unrelenting speeches of his friends, some of their words start to seep into Job's bones, and he starts taking them on. Not all of them. He never comes to the point where he's like, yeah, I did something wrong, because we know from the opening lines of the book that he was blameless and upright and feared God. So he didn't do some terrible thing, and he didn't fail to do some wonderful thing. And so Job doesn't go there. But he does listen to them saying that this was from God's hand. And so by the 9th and 10th chapters, and then the 13th and 14th chapters, and then the 19th chapter, he starts wondering what it would be like if he could hire an arbitrator, a lawyer, a judge, in the language of the ancient world, a kinsman redeemer, who would stand between him and God and judge God to be in the wrong. Now, I've been here long enough to know that there are a few lawyers in this congregation. In my original draft, I was going to insert a joke here about lawyers. I'm not going to do that. However, I will say, being angry with God is not a terrible thing. It is a venerable biblical tradition. And I think when you are angry, God expects honesty from us, and that we we can go to God with our anger. God is big enough for that. However, if you ever decide you want to lawyer up against God, you might have just stepped over the line a little bit. And that's what Job does. And so at the end of the book of Job, God shows up. The author of Job says that God shows up in the whirlwind. That sounds ominous from the get-go, right? He doesn't show up with butterflies and doves. He shows up in the whirlwind. And he begins to ask Job questions like, were you there at the beginning of creation? Were you there when I set the foundations of the earth? One of my favorite lines of the entire Bible, top 10. God asks Job, were you there when the morning stars sang together with all the heavenly host? Were you there when I set the boundary for the sea and I said this far but no further? And then God moves from the creation that was to the unfolding creation that is. And he says, do you know about the wild goat and the deer and the ox and the lion and the eagle and Leviathan? Are you able to give them their power and their seasons? He asks all these questions, and the answer to every one of these questions is no. Job was not there at the beginning of creation when the morning stars sang together. He was not there when God set the foundation. He does not order around the eagles and the ox and the donkey. On one hand, this section of Job is about God reminding Job that God is God and he isn't. It's about putting Job in his lane. But on the other hand, and I think this is why this is probably, if you have a favorite section of Job, this is probably it, and why this section of Job is brought out on happy occasions, like the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. This last section of Job reminds him and us to lift up our eyes and wonder at the creation around us. On our best days, we can be very tunnel-visioned creatures. We can see just what is in front of us. In our worst days, that tunnel gets narrower and narrower, and all we can see is our pain and our sorrow and our loss. And here is God telling Job to lift up his eyes and see what else there is, to ponder the foundations of the earth and the morning stars and the heavenly host and the oxen and the wild donkey and the eagle. There's more out there. There's things for which, even on our darkest day, that we could have cause for gratitude. We are studying in the Adult Forum, which is not on today. We return next week. We are studying gratitude, and we're working through some materials by a theologian whose name is Diana Butler Bass. And in last week's session, she went through a little piece of 1 Thessalonians where Paul tells us to give thanks in all circumstances. And the theologian reminds us that this does not mean that we are to give thanks for all things. There are some things that happen that we don't need to be thankful for. We don't need to somehow contort ourselves into somehow finding gratitude for them. We don't have to be thankful for a hurricane which devastated an entire region of our country and wiped entire towns off the map. Tomorrow is the year anniversary of the horrific terrorist attack on Israel and the beginning of that war, which has killed countless people. We do not have to give thanks for those events. But this theologian reminds us that St. Paul says that we should give thanks in all things. Even on our darkest days, there are things for which we can be thankful for. We can be thankful for this day, for the sun has risen again. We can be thankful for this moment and this breath. We can be thankful for a life that we get to share with people that we love and who get to love us back. We can be thankful for opportunities to learn and to grow, opportunities to see resurrection happen, for new life when it walks out of the tomb. There is always something there that we can be thankful for. Always some way that we can give thanks. If you were here last week, you would have heard that I said that last week was not a stewardship sermon. This is a stewardship sermon. However, I'm taking as my text today Job and not Acts, where people are falling over dead. So, I'll work with you, you work with me, and we'll get through this, okay? Stewardship asks us to look at all that God has given us and to ask the question, what do we give in return? What do we give in return? And everywhere I look here at St. David's, people are giving in return. Just this morning, we have people greeting us, and people ushering, and people reading, and soon to be people serving communion, and people making wonderful music, people serving as acolytes and vergers, people preparing for Sunday school and the rest of the activities that will be going on around us. Right here at St. David's, there are people who go and give back at St. Gabriel's and St. John's and St. Mary's and St. James School. Next Sunday, we begin hosting Family Promise again, and there'll be another cohort of people who will be cooking meals and hanging out with our guests and hosting them overnight. If you're a little tired this morning, perhaps you were here yesterday. And we saw scores of people giving of themselves, people wearing red and yellow aprons everywhere, people working in fleas and in the book tent and in the auction tent, and people serving as engineers of trains. And we had the indomitable voice of St. David's, people cooking the most delectable French fries and chili I've ever had. Some of us were put in charge of the weather, and I have to say, we did not on my watch is it going to rain. 75 and sunny on every fair day. I'm going to see how long I can ride that. Next year monsoon, sure, right? All of the ways that I just mentioned are the ways that we give back with our time and our talents, which is necessary and good. As long as we have time and talents to give, we should be offering our time and our talents. It is good. It is good for the soul. It is good for each other. It lifts up our community. And stewardship does ask us to consider our time and our talents. And stewardship also asks us to consider our treasure. I've been giving sermons for about 25 years now, and I have never heard someone say, "Rick, what I want to hear about in sermons more is money." Not once, not even from a treasurer or the head of the stewardship campaign, not once. And yet, if you open up your Bibles this week, and I hope you do, and you go through the Gospels, and you circle every time Jesus speaks about money, talks about wealth, talks about poverty, anytime he mentions money, you circle every time, you will end up circling a lot of your Gospels. Jesus spoke about money a lot. Because considering the gifts we have been given is a spiritual discipline. And considering the ways that we can give back with our time and our talents is a spiritual discipline. And considering what we can give back from our treasure is a spiritual discipline. In my short 6 weeks here, I have been bowled over by the ways I have seen St. David's give and give back. I say to people that every day I learn 2, 3, 4 things about St. David's that I didn't know before. Like, we do that? We have somebody who does that? That's incredible. And I watch this family, this ecosystem right here thrive with each other as we hold each other up, praying for each other, laughing with each other, eating with each other all the time, it seems. This is a pretty wonderful place. And so with the morning stars and the heavenly host, I invite you to consider all that God has given you, this moment, this breath, this Christian family, and to consider what God might be calling us to give back. Amen.